I stared at the email on my phone, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped it. The subject line read, "Emergency Board Meeting, New Controlling Shareholder." But it was the signature at the bottom that made my heart stop. Julian Croft, attorney at law, writing on behalf of Miss Alara Vance, majority shareholder of Vance Industries. That was my name. My name on a legal document claiming ownership of the company that had been stolen from under my feet my entire life. The same company my father had built his empire on while treating me like I was nothing more than a burden. The same company that funded my sister Serafina's wasteful lifestyle while I was being thrown out of my childhood home just 3 days ago. If you want to know how a forgotten daughter brought an entire corporate dynasty to its knees, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of justice served cold, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Now let me take you back to where this all began. 3 days earlier, I woke up to what I thought would be just another humiliating weekend at the Vance estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. I should have known better. Nothing in my family was ever just another day. At 24 years old, I had spent my entire life perfecting the art of making myself invisible, of swallowing my pride, of accepting that I would always be the consolation prize my parents got stuck with after my mother died giving birth to me. They never let me forget that part. My father, Richard Vance, made sure of it every single time he looked at me with those cold gray eyes that seemed to calculate my worth and find me wanting every single time. The morning started innocently enough. I was in my room, a modest 12 by 14-foot space on the second floor that had been mine since childhood, working on a design project for a small boutique client. My room was tucked away at the end of the hallway, the smallest bedroom in a house that had 8 of them. The walls were the same pale beige they had been painted when I was 6, because as my father had said when I asked about redecorating at 16, there was no point wasting money on cosmetic upgrades for temporary spaces. Meanwhile, Serafina's suite, which took up the entire west wing of the second floor, had been renovated 3 times in the last 5 years alone. Her most recent redesign had cost $70,000 and included custom wallpaper shipped from Paris, a crystal chandelier, and a walk-in closet larger than my entire room. Graphic design was my passion, the one thing in my life that felt like mine, but my father dismissed it as a hobby for dilettantes who couldn't handle real business. He had made it clear over the years that I was wasting my time, that I should be grateful he even let me live under his roof while pursuing such a pointless career. When I had graduated from NYU with a degree in graphic design 3 years ago, graduating summa cum laude, my father hadn't attended the ceremony. He had been in Cabo San Lucas with Catherine and Serafina, celebrating Serafina's 18th birthday at a resort that cost $15,000 a night. When I mentioned I would be graduating that same week, he had said, and I remember his exact words, "You're getting a degree in making pretty pictures. It's not exactly medical school, Alara. We'll celebrate when you do something actually impressive." Serafina hadn't even finished her first semester at USC before dropping out to pursue influencing full-time. And my father had thrown her a coming-out party that cost more than my entire 4 years of tuition. The contrast between how my father treated his 2 daughters was so stark that even strangers noticed it. At family events, he would introduce Serafina with pride in his voice, his hand on her shoulder, telling everyone about her growing social media empire and her brand deals. I was usually introduced as an afterthought, if at all. "Oh, and this is Alara, my other daughter. She does some computer work or something." When Serafina wanted a new car for her 21st birthday, my father bought her a Range Rover Sport that cost $90,000 and had it delivered with a giant red bow. When I asked if I could borrow one of the family cars to drive to a client meeting, I was told that if I needed transportation, I should take the train like everyone else who couldn't afford their own vehicle. Serafina's credit card, which was linked to the family account, had no limit. Mine had been canceled 2 years ago because my father said I needed to learn fiscal responsibility, even though the most I had ever spent in a single month was $800, mostly on art supplies and software subscriptions. Around 11 in the morning, I heard voices downstairs, lots of them. I glanced out my window and saw at least a dozen luxury cars parked in our circular driveway. Mercedes, Teslas, BMWs, even a Bentley. My younger sister Serafina, 21 and absolutely stunning with her golden blonde hair that cost $500 a month to maintain, her perfect figure sculpted by a personal trainer who came to the house 5 days a week, and her flawless skin maintained by monthly facials that cost more than most people's rent, was hosting what she called a brunch party. She did this often, every other weekend at minimum, inviting her influencer friends over to show off the house, the grounds, the Olympic-sized swimming pool, the tennis courts, the wine cellar, the home theater. She treated our family estate like her personal content studio, and my father encouraged it. He loved seeing the house featured on social media, loved the way Serafina's posts made the Vance name synonymous with luxury and success. Never mind that none of it was hers. Never mind that she hadn't earned a single dollar of the wealth she flaunted so casually. I usually stayed out of the way during these events. I had learned over the years that my presence was not wanted, that I somehow diminished the aesthetic Serafina was trying to create. Once, when I was 19, I had made the mistake of walking through the background of one of her videos. She had screamed at me for 20 minutes about ruining her content, and my father had taken her side, telling me I needed to be more aware of when Serafina was working. As if posing for Instagram was equivalent to the 60-hour weeks I put in building my design portfolio. Today, I wish I had stayed in my room. I went downstairs to grab some coffee from the kitchen, planning to slip back upstairs unnoticed. But as I passed through the foyer, I heard my name. Serafina was standing in the center of our grand living room, surrounded by at least 20 people holding mimosas and tiny plates of expensive hors d'oeuvres. My father and stepmother Catherine were there too, both dressed impeccably as always. My father wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost $2,000. Catherine was dripping in diamonds, including the tennis bracelet Serafina had given her for Mother's Day last year, purchased with my father's credit card, of course. When I saw all those eyes turn toward me, I felt that familiar flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I was wearing jeans and an old NYU sweatshirt, my hair in a messy bun, no makeup. Next to Serafina, who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine in her designer dress and perfect makeup, I felt like the help. Serafina's voice rang out clear and bright, like she was making an announcement at a gala. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking about this for weeks now, and I've made a decision." She paused dramatically, and I saw several phones come up, already recording. My sister lived for content. Every moment of her life was a potential post, a story, a reel. I'm going to convert Alara's room into a professional content creation studio. She's 24 now. It's time she learned to stand on her own 2 feet instead of mooching off the family. She said it with a bright smile, as if she were announcing a fun renovation project. Not the destruction of my entire life. Her friends immediately started commenting, their voices overlapping. "Oh my God, that's going to be amazing. You need a dedicated space, for sure. Finally, right? About time." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there frozen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, as my entire world tilted sideways. Around me, I could hear the gasps and giggles of Serafina's friends. Some of them were openly filming now, their phones pointed directly at me, capturing my humiliation in high definition. This was going to be on social media within the hour, I realized with growing horror. My humiliation would be public entertainment for thousands of strangers. I could already imagine the captions. "When your sister finally gets kicked out, family drama." The look on her face, though. I waited for my father to say something, to tell Serafina she was being ridiculous, that you don't just kick your own daughter out of her home for a vanity project. Instead, Richard Vance threw his head back and laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full of amusement, and it cut deeper than any insult he had ever hurled at me over the years. "That's brilliant, sweetheart," he said, walking over to put his arm around Serafina's shoulders in a gesture of affection I had witnessed 1,000 times but never experienced myself. "Absolutely brilliant. This one here," he gestured at me with his champagne flute, not even bothering to use my name, as if I were too insignificant to warrant that small courtesy, "has been clinging to that mediocre design work of hers for years. Maybe being forced into the real world will teach her something about actual ambition." He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes that went beyond indifference. It was contempt. Pure, undisguised contempt. "You've been living here rent-free, doing your little projects, pretending you're building a career. Serafina has 300,000 followers and makes more in a month than you've probably made in your entire life. It's time you learned what real success looks like." The comparison was like acid. He had never once compared us favorably to me. It was always Serafina who was held up as the standard, Serafina who was praised, Serafina who could do no wrong. When I had landed my first major client 2 years ago, a project that paid $15,000, I had been so proud. I had run downstairs to tell my father, thinking maybe, finally, he would see that I was good at something. He had barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice," he had said, his tone flat. "Maybe save some of that for rent." 2 weeks later, Serafina signed a deal with a fashion brand for $50,000, and my father had taken the entire family out to a Michelin star restaurant to celebrate. He had stood up at the table and made a toast, telling everyone in the restaurant that his daughter was going to be a star. I had sat there, invisible as always, watching Serafina bask in his approval while I pushed my $300 meal around my plate, my own achievement already forgotten. Catherine, my stepmother who had raised me since I was 6 months old, nodded approvingly. She had never been cruel, just distant, as if I were a piece of furniture she had inherited and didn't quite know what to do with. Serafina needs space to grow her brand, she said, sipping her mimosa delicately. You understand, don't you, Alara? Your sister is building something real. Something that matters. She needs room to create. And frankly, dear, you've been holding her back. This house isn't large enough for both of your careers. The way she said careers when referring to me, with just the slightest pause, made it clear what she thought of my work. Serafina's influencing was a career. My design work was a hobby I was being indulged in, something that matters. The words echoed in my head. 24 years of trying to earn their approval, of staying quiet, of making myself small so as not to be a burden, and this was what I got. I was less important than a room for my sister to film TikTok videos in. The logical part of my brain knew I should argue, should demand to be treated with basic human respect, but the words stuck in my throat the way they always did. Years of conditioning had trained me to accept whatever scraps of dignity they threw my way. What happened next still plays in my mind like a nightmare I can't escape. Serafina, emboldened by our parents' approval and the attention of her audience, walked past me toward the stairs. I'm going to start measuring the space right now, she announced, and several of her friends followed her like eager disciples. I trailed behind, some instinct telling me I needed to see this, needed to witness how little I mattered in this house. When we reached my room, Serafina threw open the door with theatrical flair. She walked straight to my closet and yanked out a large cardboard box I kept on the top shelf. It was my memory box, filled with everything precious I had managed to hold on to over the years. Sketches from my childhood, journals I had kept since I was 12, photographs of me with my grandmother Eleanor who had died 2 years ago, the only person in this family who had ever truly loved me. Serafina didn't even look at what was inside. She just grabbed the box and dumped it onto the floor in one violent motion. Papers scattered everywhere. My grandmother's photo landed face down on the hardwood, the glass in the frame cracking with an audible snap. You need to get all this junk out of here by tonight, Serafina said, her voice bored, as if she were discussing taking out the trash. I already called the contractor. They're coming tomorrow morning to start the renovations. I'm thinking we'll knock down that wall, expand into the bathroom space. This is going to be incredible for my aesthetic. I looked at my life scattered across the floor, at the broken picture frame, at the journals that held my most private thoughts now played open for everyone to see. Something inside me that had been bending for 24 years finally snapped. I felt it physically, like a rubber band stretched too far. The room went very quiet. Even Serafina's friends stopped chattering, perhaps sensing that something had shifted in the air. I bent down slowly and picked up my grandmother's photograph. The glass had shattered diagonally across her face, distorting her warm smile. I held it carefully and stood up, meeting Serafina's eyes for what felt like the first time in years. She was so beautiful, so confident, so utterly certain that the world existed to serve her. And maybe it did. Maybe I had been helping create that reality by never fighting back. This studio is going to be the only thing you ever actually earn, I said, my voice coming out surprisingly steady. Enjoy it. Then I turned to face my father, who had followed us upstairs along with Catherine and half the brunch guests. They were all crowded in the hallway, watching this family drama unfold like it was their entertainment for the afternoon. Richard Vance looked slightly annoyed, as if I were a meeting that was running over time. That look, that casual dismissal, gave me the final push I needed. I'm leaving, I said clearly, and I'm never coming back to this house. I saw surprise flicker across my father's face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by indifference. He shrugged, an elegant, dismissive gesture that somehow managed to convey that my presence or absence made absolutely no difference to him. Catherine looked relieved. Serafina was already on her phone, probably posting about the drama to her followers. I packed one suitcase. That was all I could manage to carry on my own, and I refused to ask for help. I took my laptop, some clothes, my grandmother's broken photograph, and my journals. Everything else could rot in that house for all I cared. 24 years of my life fit into a single rolling suitcase that made a lonely sound as I dragged it across the marble floors of the foyer. Behind me, I could hear the party resuming, laughter and conversation flowing as if I had never existed at all. As I stepped out the front door, pulling my suitcase behind me, I heard Serafina's voice one last time, loud and clear from the living room. God, that was so awkward. She always has to make everything about her, you know? Anyway, who wants to come see the space? I'm thinking floor-to-ceiling mirrors on that wall. More laughter? More approval? I kept walking. The October air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the coming winter. I stood at the end of our long driveway, staring at the tree-lined street that led away from the estate. I had absolutely no plan. I had maybe $3,000 in my personal bank account, enough for a few weeks in a cheap hotel while I figured out my next move. My client list was small but steady. I could survive on it if I was careful. The thought should have terrified me, but all I felt was a strange, hollow numbness. That was when I heard the engine. Low, powerful, unmistakably expensive. I turned around and saw a car pulling through the estate gates, but this wasn't just any car. It was a Maybach S680, glossy black with chrome accents that caught the afternoon sun. The kind of car that cost more than most people's houses. It rolled up beside me and stopped, with barely a whisper of sound. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and white gloves. A professional driver, I realized. He walked around the car with precise, measured steps, and opened the rear passenger door with a slight bow. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice cultured and respectful. "We've been expecting you." I stared at him, my mind unable to process what was happening. "I think you have the wrong person," I managed to say. "I didn't call for a car." The driver smiled, and there was something kind in his expression. "Mr. Croft sent me, miss. He's been waiting for you. Please, allow me to take your luggage." Before I could respond, he had already lifted my suitcase and placed it carefully in the trunk. He gestured to the open door. I glanced back at the house one more time. Through the large front windows, I could see people moving around, drinks in hand, living their perfect lives. My father was visible for just a moment, his hand on Serafina's shoulder as he listened to her explain something with animated gestures. Neither of them looked toward the driveway. Neither of them cared that I was leaving. I got into the car, the door closed with a solid, expensive thunk, sealing me into a world of leather and wood grain and profound silence. Through the tinted windows, I watched as we drove back past the house. I saw Serafina in the window of what used to be my room, her arms spread wide as if measuring the space. I saw my father's profile in the living room, laughing at something someone had said. I saw the life I was leaving behind, and I felt nothing but relief. The drive took about 45 minutes. I watched Greenwich disappear behind us as we merged onto the highway heading toward Manhattan. The driver didn't try to make conversation, for which I was grateful. My mind was spinning, trying to understand what was happening. Who was Mr. Croft? Why had he sent a car for me? How did he even know I would need one? We pulled up in front of a building in Midtown Manhattan that made my breath catch. It was all glass and steel, soaring up into the sky like something out of a dream. The driver opened my door, retrieved my pathetic single suitcase, and led me through a lobby that was more art gallery than entrance hall. A private elevator took us to the top floor. The only button in the elevator was marked P for penthouse. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that made me forget how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire apartment, offering a 360-degree view of Manhattan. The space was massive, decorated in shades of cream and gray with touches of gold, minimalist but impossibly luxurious. Real art hung on the walls, pieces I recognized from magazines. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Standing in the center of this impossible space was a man I had never met but somehow recognized. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his early 50s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a three-piece suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and he held a leather portfolio under one arm. When he saw me, his stern face softened into something almost gentle. "Miss Vance," he said, walking forward with his hand extended. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm sorry we had to meet under these circumstances, but I'm afraid time was of the essence. Please, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." I shook his hand, feeling completely out of my depth. "I don't understand what's happening," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "How did you know I would be leaving today? Who are you?" Mr. Croft guided me to a cream-colored sofa and waited for me to sit before taking the chair across from me. He placed the portfolio on the coffee table between us and folded his hands on top of it. "I was your grandmother's attorney," he said simply. "Eleanor Vance was my client for nearly 30 years. 2 years ago, before she passed away, she came to me with very specific instructions. She told me she feared that Richard would continue to treat you as he always had, that the situation would eventually become untenable. She asked me to watch over you and to intervene when the time was right." Tears sprang to my eyes at the mention of my grandmother. Eleanor had been the one bright spot in my childhood, the one person who saw me, really saw me, and loved what she found. She used to tell me I had her mother's eyes, that I was stronger than I knew, that someday I would understand why she paid such special attention to me. After she died, I had felt more alone than ever. "Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman," Mr. Croft continued. "She built Vance Industries from nothing with her first husband, your grandfather Edward. When he died, she was the one who grew the company into what it became. Richard, I'm afraid, always believed he was the architect of the family fortune. He wasn't. He inherited a thriving business and has been slowly running it into the ground with his ego and poor decisions ever since." He opened the portfolio and pulled out a stack of legal documents. Eleanor knew this would happen. She also knew that Richard would never treat you fairly, that he saw you as a reminder of his greatest failure, his inability to save your mother. So she took steps. Very careful, very secret steps. Mr. Croft slid the first document across to me. It was a deed. A property deed, I realized, scanning the legal language. "For this penthouse. In my name. Your grandmother purchased this property 10 years ago under a shell corporation," he explained. "She left it to you in a trust that activated upon certain conditions being met. One of those conditions was you being forced to leave the family home." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the document, my grandmother's signature clear and strong at the bottom, dated just weeks before she died. She had planned this. She had known. "That's not all, Mr. Croft said quietly. He pulled out another thick stack of papers, these bound in blue legal backing. "Eleanor transferred 60% of her controlling shares in Vance Industries to you through an unbreakable trust structure. Your father currently holds 35%. The remaining 5% is split among various board members and investors. As of today, Ilara, you are the majority shareholder and controlling owner of Vance Industries. The company is yours." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the sofa, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My father runs that company. He's the CEO. How could my grandmother just give it to me?" "Your grandmother built that company," Mr. Croft corrected gently. "Your father managed it. There's a significant difference. Eleanor retained controlling interest precisely because she didn't trust Richard to maintain her legacy. She was right not to. The company has lost over $200 million in the last 18 months alone due to your father's vanity projects and poor acquisitions. The board has been increasingly concerned, but without a controlling shareholder to challenge him, their hands were tied." He pulled out another document, this one a letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my grandmother's elegant script, slightly shaky from the illness that would take her life a few months after she wrote it. My hands trembled as I took the letter. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, then Julian has determined that the time has come. I'm sorry I could not be there to see this moment myself, but I trust that you will understand why I had to do things this way. Your father is my son, and I love him, but he is not the person I hoped he would become. He has allowed his grief and his ego to turn him into someone cruel and small. I watched him treat you the way his own father treated him, and I could not let that continue unchecked. You have something Richard lacks, something that cannot be taught or bought. You have a creative soul, a generous heart, and a quiet strength that reminds me of my own mother. The company needs someone like you, someone who understands that business is not just about profit but about people, about building something meaningful that will last. I know you think you are not ready for this. I know you doubt yourself because he has spent your whole life making you doubt. But I see you clearly, my darling girl. I always have. You are going to take what I built and make it something even more beautiful. Trust Julian, trust yourself, and know that I am so very proud of you. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor." I couldn't stop the tears anymore. They spilled down my cheeks as I clutched the letter, my grandmother's final words to me, her final gift. Mr. Croft waited patiently, and when I finally looked up at him, his expression was understanding. "She loved you very much," he said softly, "and she was very, very careful. This is all legally airtight. Your father cannot contest it, and he cannot remove you." As of this morning, when you left the house, the trust conditions were met, and the shares transferred automatically into your name. The board has been notified. There's a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. I recommend you attend." The rest of that evening passed in a blur. Mr. Croft walked me through the basics of what I now owned, what my legal rights were, what steps we could take. He told me that my grandmother had also left me a cash inheritance of $5 million, carefully hidden in offshore accounts that had been slowly accumulating interest for years. He explained that the penthouse was fully furnished, that everything in it was mine, that I could stay here as long as I wanted. When he finally left around 8 that night, I was alone in this impossible space, with an entire city glittering below me and my whole life turned upside down. I walked through the penthouse in a daze, opening doors to discover a master bedroom with a bed the size of my entire old room, a bathroom with a soaking tub overlooking the skyline, a study with built-in bookshelves and a desk positioned to catch the morning light. In the walk-in closet, I found a note in my grandmother's handwriting pinned to the door. "Every queen needs a proper wardrobe. Enjoy. Love, Grandma." The closet was full. Not with a random selection, but with clothes in my exact size, my exact style, all high-quality brands I had only ever dreamed of affording. I sat on the bed and let myself cry. I cried for the grandmother I had lost, for the father who had never loved me, for the 24 years I had spent trying to earn approval that would never come. But somewhere under the grief, I felt something else stirring. Anger. Cold, clear, righteous anger. My father had made my life a misery. He had broken me down systematically, convinced me I was worthless, allowed Serafina to treat me like garbage, and finally had the audacity to laugh while they threw me out. And now I held the keys to everything he valued most. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. I read every article I could find about Vance Industries, about my father's tenure as CEO, about the company's recent struggles. Mr. Croft had been right. My father was running the company into the ground. He had made a series of catastrophically bad acquisitions, purchasing companies in markets he didn't understand for inflated prices. He had alienated key partners. Worst of all, I discovered evidence of something that made my blood run cold. Marcus Thorne, my father's right-hand man and the company's CFO, had been systematically siphoning money through shell companies disguised as supplier contracts. I called Mr. Croft at 10 p.m., not caring that it was late. "I found something," I said when he answered. "Marcus Thorne is embezzling from the company. I can prove it." There was a pause, then I heard what might have been a smile in his voice. "Your grandmother said you were clever. Send me everything you found. I'll have our forensic accountants verify it tonight. If you're right, we'll have him arrested at tomorrow's meeting." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in that study, in front of those massive windows with the city spread out below me like a promise, and I planned. For the first time in my life, I had power. Real power. Not just wealth, but control, leverage, the ability to change things, and I was going to use every bit of it. At 7 a.m., I did something I had never done before. I took my time getting ready. I chose a suit from the closet, a perfectly tailored navy blue number with subtle pinstripes that made me look older, more serious. I put on makeup carefully, not to look pretty, but to look professional, untouchable. I pulled my dark hair back into a sleek bun. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who belonged in that boardroom. I looked like Eleanor Vance's granddaughter. The car arrived at 8:30. Mr. Croft was already inside, along with another man he introduced as David Chen, a board member who had been loyal to my grandmother and who was, as he put it, thrilled to see Richard finally get what he deserves. We went over the plan one more time as we drove to the Vance Industries headquarters in downtown Manhattan. It was simple, really. Mr. Croft would make the announcement about the share transfer. I would take my seat at the head of the table, and then I would systematically dismantle everything my father had built his identity around. The building was impressive, all glass and steel with the Vance Industries logo prominently displayed. I had been here before, a handful of times as a child, always trailing behind my father like an afterthought while Serafina charmed everyone in sight. Today, I walked through those doors like I owned the place. Because I did. The boardroom was on the 40th floor, a long room with a massive table and windows overlooking the city. When we entered, there were already a dozen people seated. My father was at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Marcus Thorne sat to his right, looking smug. A few other executives I didn't recognize were scattered around, all in expensive suits, all looking vaguely bored. Richard Vance looked up when the door opened. His eyes passed over Mr. Croft, dismissed David Chen, and then landed on me. I watched the confusion flicker across his face, followed by annoyance. "Ilara?" he said. "My name a question. What are you doing here? This is a board meeting. It's not appropriate for you to just show up." I didn't answer. I walked steadily around the table, Mr. Croft on one side and David Chen on the other, until I reached the head of the table where my father sat. He looked up at me with that familiar expression of dismissal, about to say something cutting, when Mr. Croft spoke. "Mr. Vance, if you would please take a seat elsewhere. That chair belongs to the controlling shareholder, which, as of yesterday, is no longer you." The room went completely silent. My father's face went through a series of expressions so quickly I almost couldn't track them. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something that might have been fear. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, not moving from the chair. Mr. Croft placed a folder on the table in front of him. Eleanor Vance transferred 60% of her shares to her granddaughter Ilara 2 years ago through an irrevocable trust. The shares were held in trust until certain conditions were met. As of yesterday, those conditions were satisfied, and the shares transferred to Miss Vance's direct control. She is now the majority shareholder and, as such, has the right to this seat. I watched my father's face drain of color as he opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. His hands were shaking slightly, and for the first time in my life, I saw Richard Vance look genuinely afraid. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "Mother wouldn't have done this. This has to be some kind of fraud." "I assure you, it's entirely legal and uncontestable," Mr. Croft replied calmly. "Your mother was very thorough. Now, if you would please move, we have business to conduct." My father stood slowly, and I saw the exact moment when the reality hit him. This was real. This was happening. His mother, the woman he had always claimed to respect above all others, had essentially cut him out of the company she had built, and she had given it all to me, the daughter he had dismissed as worthless. The daughter he had laughed at while throwing her out of her home just yesterday. I watched him struggle with what to say, and in that moment, I understood that words weren't necessary. I simply walked past him and took the chair. It felt like sitting on a throne. Once I was seated, with my father still standing awkwardly to the side, Marcus Thorne cleared his throat. He looked nervous now, though he was trying to hide it. "Well, this is certainly surprising news," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "But Miss Vance, with all due respect, you have no experience running a company of this size. Perhaps it would be wise to allow those of us who understand the business to continue managing operations while you learn." I looked at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the file I had compiled the night before, and connected it to the boardroom screen. Numbers filled the display, spreadsheets showing money flowing from Vance Industries to various suppliers, then being funneled through shell corporations that all traced back to accounts controlled by Marcus Thorne. "You're right, Mr. Thorne," I said quietly. "I don't have experience running a company, but I do know how to read a balance sheet. And what I see here is approximately $15 million in fraudulent payments made to fake suppliers over the last 3 years, all of which ended up in your accounts." The room erupted. Board members leaned forward, staring at the screen with growing shock. Marcus Thorne's face went from tan to gray in seconds. "That's ridiculous," he sputtered. "Those are legitimate business expenses. This is character assassination." "Our forensic accounting team verified everything last night, Mr. Croft said, his voice cold. "The evidence has been turned over to the FBI and the SEC. Gentlemen, could you please come in?" 2 men in dark suits entered the boardroom, both wearing FBI badges. They walked directly to Marcus Thorne, who tried to stand but found his legs wouldn't support him. "Marcus Thorne, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud," one of them said, pulling out handcuffs. The whole room watched in stunned silence as they let him out, his protests fading down the hallway. When the door closed behind them, I turned my attention back to my father. He had finally sat down, but not in his usual seat. He had taken a chair at the side of the table, as far from me as possible, and he looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "Now then," I said, pulling up another presentation. "Let's talk about the state of this company and why it's currently losing money." For the next hour, I walked the board through every bad decision my father had made in the last 3 years. I showed them the acquisitions that had tanked, The partnerships he had destroyed through arrogance, the talent he had driven away by refusing to listen to anyone's expertise but his own. I had done my homework. Every criticism I made was backed up by data, by expert analysis, by numbers that didn't lie. By the time I was finished, several board members were nodding in agreement, and my father looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The solution is simple, I said, closing my laptop. Richard Vance will step down as CEO effective immediately. I'm not comfortable taking that role myself yet. So I'd like to propose that David Chen serve as interim CEO while we conduct a proper search for permanent leadership. In the meantime, Mr. Vance can retain a position as senior advisor, which will come with an office and a modest salary, but no operational authority whatsoever. The alternative is that he can resign entirely, effective today. I looked directly at my father when I said it. His face was red now, a vein pulsing in his temple. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I built this company. I've given my whole life to it. You're a child playing dress-up who knows nothing about business." "I'm a child you threw out of her home yesterday," I replied evenly. "A child whose room you were planning to give away to her sister so she could film TikTok videos. A child you've spent 24 years telling she was worthless. Well, here's what this worthless child is worth. 60% of the voting shares in this company. Which means I don't need your permission, and I don't need your approval. I never did. I just didn't know that until yesterday." David Chen called for a vote. With my 60%, it wasn't even close. My father was out as CEO. The board voted 7-3 in favor of the change, with even some of my father's oldest allies abandoning him once they saw the evidence of the company's decline. When the meeting adjourned, Richard Vance sat in his chair for a long moment, staring at the table. Then he stood and walked out without another word to me. But I wasn't done yet. As the board members filed out, some congratulating me, others looking shell-shocked, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Serafina. It read, "Check your bank account, then check your email. We need to talk." By the time I got back to the penthouse that afternoon, Serafina had called me 17 times and sent 43 text messages. I ignored all of them. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine from the fully stocked bar in the kitchen and stood at the windows, watching the city. My city now, in a way. I had won. I had taken back everything they thought they could take from me and then some. But the victory felt strangely hollow. Around 7 that evening, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" Alara. It was my father's voice, but different somehow, smaller, uncertain. "Can we talk? Please. I need to explain some things." I should have hung up. The smart thing, the satisfying thing, would have been to let him beg and then tell him no. But my grandmother's letter was still on my desk, her words about quiet strength and generous hearts echoing in my mind. "Where are you?" I asked. An hour later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Greenwich, the same town where I had grown up but far enough from the estate that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. My father arrived looking like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loose. He ordered a coffee he didn't drink, and sat across from me, struggling to find words. "I'm sorry," he finally said, and I heard something crack in his voice. "I'm sorry for all of it, for yesterday, for every day before that. For making you feel like you were a burden when you were the best thing I ever had." He looked up at me, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. Richard Vance did not cry. "Your mother died because of me. Because I pushed her to come to a work event when she was 8 months pregnant, because I was too proud to admit I needed her there to close a deal. She went into early labor during the dinner, and by the time we got her to the hospital, it was too late. The doctors saved you, but they couldn't save her." I sat very still, processing this information I had never heard before. My father continued, the words pouring out like he had been holding them in for decades. "Every time I looked at you, I saw her. And I saw my failure, so I pushed you away because it was easier than dealing with the guilt. And then when Eleanor started paying attention to you, started favoring you over me, I felt like I was losing both of you, so I pushed harder. I convinced myself you were weak, that you needed to toughen up, that I was doing you a favor by treating you the way my father treated me. I was wrong. About all of it." He reached across the table, and I saw his hand was shaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed any chance of having a real relationship with you. But I need you to know that when your mother was dying, the last thing she said to me was to take care of her baby girl. I failed her. I failed you, and I'm sorrier than you will ever know." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe him, to accept this apology and build some kind of relationship with the father I had always wanted. But another part of me, the part that had spent yesterday watching him laugh while my life was dismantled, knew that one apology couldn't erase 24 years of damage. I appreciate you telling me this, I said carefully, but sorry doesn't change what you did. Sorry doesn't give me back the childhood I should have had, or the father I needed. I know, he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I know I can't fix this, but maybe, if you'd be willing, I could try to do better, with the time I have left. I could try to be the father I should have been. We talked for another 2 hours. He told me stories about my mother I had never heard, about how she had been an artist too, about how they had met at a gallery showing. He told me about his own father, about the impossible standards and the constant criticism that had shaped him into someone hard and cold. He didn't make excuses, but he helped me understand. And slowly, I felt some of the anger start to dissolve, replaced by something sadder but cleaner. When we finally parted ways, I didn't promise him anything. But I also didn't close the door completely. You can have your advisory position at the company, I told him. But you'll report to David Chen, not to me, and if you want any kind of relationship with me, you'll have to earn it, one day at a time. Starting with how you treat Serafina. The next few months were a whirlwind. I officially took over as chairman of the board, though I left the CEO position to David Chen, who proved to be exactly what the company needed. Together, we restructured operations, cut the dead weight, and brought in new talent. We launched an initiative combining technology and sustainable design, something that felt true to both my grandmother's business vision and my own creative instincts. The company didn't just stabilize. It thrived. Stock prices climbed. Profits returned. Within 6 months, Vance Industries was making headlines again, but this time for the right reasons. Serafina proved to be more complicated. After I cut her $500,000 annual sponsorship deal with the company, she had a complete meltdown that played out across social media for the world to see. Her influencer friends disappeared almost overnight once the money dried up. She had to sell most of her designer wardrobe and move out of the estate when my father and Catherine downsized to a modest house in Westchester. For a while, I thought she was going to spiral completely. Then something unexpected happened. With nothing left to lose and no one left to perform for, Serafina actually started to change. She enrolled in business school at NYU, paying her own way with what little money she had saved. She got a part-time job at a marketing firm, starting at the bottom. And one day, about 4 months after I had taken over the company, she showed up at my office. She looked different. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, no extensions. She wore jeans and a blazer, no designer labels visible. And when she sat down across from me, she didn't demand or pout or perform. She just looked tired and real. I don't know how to apologize for being who I was, she said quietly. I was a spoiled brat who thought the world revolved around her. I hurt you in ways I'm only starting to understand, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. We talked for hours that day, really talked for the first time in our lives. She told me how she had been raised to believe her only value was in her appearance and her ability to attract attention, how no one had ever expected her to be smart or capable or independent. She told me about the eating disorders and anxiety she had hidden behind the perfect Instagram facade, about how hollow it all felt even when she was at her peak. And she asked me, not to forgive her, but to give her a chance to become someone worth forgiving. I offered her a deal. I would pay for her business school tuition on the condition that she actually took it seriously, that she learned something real and built actual skills. And when she graduated, if she wanted, there might be a place for her at Vance Industries. Not a vanity position, but real work. She took the deal. More than that, she thrived. Turns out, under all that manufactured perfection, Serafina actually had a brain and a work ethic when she decided to use them. My relationship with my father remained complicated. He took the advisory position seriously, working with the company's charitable foundation to build something meaningful. We had lunch once a month, awkward conversations that slowly became easier. I couldn't forget the past, but I learned to stop letting it poison my future. Catherine and I never became close, but we reached a kind of détente, a mutual respect born of acknowledging our mistakes. The person who surprised me most, though, was myself. I had spent so long thinking of myself as weak, as someone who let life happen to her rather than making choices. But standing in that boardroom, taking control of my own destiny, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. Not the loud, aggressive strength of my father, but something quieter and more resilient. The kind of strength my grandmother had seen in me all along. A year after I walked out of my childhood home with a single suitcase, I stood on stage at a technology conference, announcing a revolutionary new platform that combined artificial intelligence with sustainable design principles. Vance Industries had just been named one of the fastest-growing companies in America. The audience gave me a standing ovation. Afterward, in the green room, David Chen congratulated me with genuine pride. "Eleanor would be proud," he said, and I knew he was right. But the moment I remember most clearly from that day didn't happen on stage. It happened later that night, when I returned to the penthouse and found a package waiting for me. Inside was one of my grandmother's paintings, one I had always loved from her house. My father had sent it with a note that read simply, "She always said you had her eyes. Now I see she meant you had her vision too. Love, Dad." I hung the painting in my study, right where I could see it while I worked. And sometimes, late at night when I was alone with the city lights below me, I would look at it and remember that girl who got thrown out of her home with nothing but a suitcase and a broken picture frame. I would remember how small she felt, how worthless, how convinced that she had nothing to offer the world. And then I would look around at everything she had built, everything she had become, and I would smile. Because here's what I learned. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will try to make you small so they can feel big. They will take your kindness for weakness and your quiet strength for submission. They will convince you that you are worth less than you are, because it serves their ego or their comfort or their bank account, and if you let them, they will hollow you out until there's nothing left but the shape they want you to fill. But you are not what they say you are. You are not defined by their limitations or their cruelty or their inability to see you clearly. You are defined by what you do when you finally stop asking for their approval and start building a life that doesn't require it. You are defined by how you rise when they try to keep you down, by how you rebuild when they tear you apart, by how you thrive in spite of everything they did to stop you. My grandmother knew this. She knew that the greatest revenge is not destruction but transformation, not making them pay, but making yourself into someone they can no longer diminish. She gave me the tools I needed, but the strength was always mine. It was always there, waiting for the moment when I finally decided I was worth fighting for. So to anyone out there who feels like I did, who has been told they are too much or not enough or simply not what their family wanted, you are not broken. You are not worthless. And the day you walk away from people who make you feel that way is not the end of your story. It's the beginning. The penthouse is still mine. The company is still mine. But more importantly, my life is mine, and I would trade none of it to go back to that house in Greenwich where I learned to make myself small, because I was never meant to be small. I was meant to be exactly who I am now, Eleanor Vance's granddaughter, carrying forward her legacy of quiet strength, creative vision, and the unshakable belief that the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. So here's my question for you. What would you do if you suddenly had the power to change everything? Would you burn it all down? Or would you build something better? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who refused to stay down when life tried to keep them there. Your support means everything, and I'll see you in the next one.